Hi, everyone. I'm Jan Marshall-Doms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women, by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. You're here with us today watching our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion show brought to you each and every Tuesday. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out all of our content, and join us at joinmayshad.com to learn about how you too can become a part of together how we revolutionize how professional women connect, engage, and do business together. I am so thrilled and honored to welcome Charlotte Clymer to the stage today. Hi, Charlotte. Welcome.
Hey, Jen. How you doing?
Hi. Good. It's such a thrill and such an honor. It's so interesting, and I cannot wait to share this story with our viewers today, how you and I originally met a little bit over 4 years ago, and here we are 4 years later. We have so much to catch up on and talk about.
4 years worth, you would say.
Yeah, exactly. So Charlotte is a writer, an LGBTQ activist, communications consultant, and military veteran. She is most recently the press secretary for Rapid Response and Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest civil rights organization dedicated to advancing lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer equality. Her day-to-day work involved running the organization's messaging in response to the White House and federal policy. Charlotte, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So our backstory, which I love this, you and I met on Twitter a little bit over 4 years ago during the last presidential campaign. So much has happened over the last 4 years. Talk to us a bit about how your world has changed over the last 4 years and what have been a few of your biggest aha moments.
Well, I think the last 4 years have changed for everyone on a macro scale, right? We're in a very different world than we were even from a year ago because of COVID. But the last 4 years have been truly transformative, I think, for our country overall. For me personally, I came out of the closet as transgender about a year after the election. I was really worried about it because I had been thinking maybe I should wait until after Trump leaves office. And I decided, to hell with it. I'm not going to let this White House dictate or arbitrate when I come out and when I kind of live my truth as a human being. That's not something I would ask anyone else to do, and I certainly wasn't going to do it either. And I was overcome with generosity and affirmation and support from not only friends and family, but from, I think, the larger community that surrounded me in general, whether it was coworkers or people I'd served with in the military. There was really a level of support that I would hope any LGBTQ person gets when they come out of the closet. And so I think what's so striking about these past 3 or 4 years now is that overlap of being openly transgender in the public square at a time when we are seeing an overwhelmingly negative national leadership that seems to, I would say, fail in its effort to unite people. And navigating both of those narratives has been quite a remarkable journey.
Charlotte, I just want to say thank you for everything you do each and every day. And you're such an inspiration to so many of us as we think about just the complexity of identity, right? And at Mayshad, we talk a lot about the complexity of how we show up, how we're perceived, and how we're experienced. And for all of us within the ecosystem that are role models to the next generation of leaders and role models, for and within our own community, there's the personal is political, right? And we know that there are incredible joys, but yet also incredible challenges that come with being a role model. And you've gone through so much and have experienced so much for yourself in the last 4 years, but then you're also a source of joy and inspiration for other transgender individuals as well. Talk to us about how do you balance that? How do you balance, staying true to yourself and wanting to continue being the voice for others who may not have the privilege of having access to platforms such as yourself, but then also struggling, maybe not struggling is the right word, but finding that balance, I guess, is what I'm asking.
That's a really great question. I have had many trans non-binary people reach out to me for help and to, I think, find this connection of solidarity in our experiences and what we go through. I do think it's important to point out from the outset that, I am one trans person. The trans non-binary community is enormous. It's not just in the United States. There are trans people in every country, every culture, religion, race, ethnicity, going back to antiquity, Greece, and the Middle East. So as long as there's really been recorded human history, there have been trans non-binary people. And what is so critically important right now in understanding what it means to be transgender or non-binary or gender non-conforming is that we do have this infinite variety of experiences. And so when I do talk about what it means to be trans with other people, I like to point that out. I will say from my own perspective, one thing that has been critically difficult in navigating is that people want to put me into certain boxes. So because I'm transgender, they want to kind of throw me into one box of what transgender people are supposed to be. Because I'm a military veteran, they want to throw me into a certain box because this is only what military people can be. Because I'm a Christian, they want to throw me into a box because this is only what Christians can be. And really, I can no more deny any one part of my collective identity than I can deny another part. There is a large part of me that is this Christian military veteran from Central Texas who was raised in an impoverished family that is also from the South. And there's this other part of me that is a trans woman who lives in D.C., who has strong progressive values and believes that our collective future is really rooted in this intentional effort to ensure that no one gets left behind regardless of who they are or who they love. And those two parts really don't conflict with each other. But there are people, whether they be social conservatives, whether they be some folks on the very far left, who want me to, I guess, fit into their box. And I don't. And I think that tends to annoy people. And navigating that conflict has been, I would say, an interesting journey.
Do you think that that's partly because when we put people in boxes, there's a sense of safety and security, and therefore then trust, because we know what we know, right? There's a lot of fear, and I think that that's a big part of what this country is experiencing right now, because we don't know what we don't know, right? And there's the fear of the other. I mean, you take a look at the way in which this country really truly is diverse, and the access to resources in the sense of it's not the country that it was, even 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. We're going to see incredible transfer of wealth into the hands of women. Mm-hmm. And we know that from a racial perspective, the racial makeup of this country is going to look very, very different in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And that's really about the fear of loss of power, right? And given that this country was founded on the notion of individual rights as opposed to a collective sort of, ecosystem, I honestly think that we are where we are today for so many different reasons, but including the part that there's a fear of the loss of transfer of power.
That's right. That's right. And, we have never lived in a more uncertain time in our country. And I don't say that lightly. There was certainly the Revolutionary War period. There was the antebellum / Civil War era. There was the Great Depression and World War II era. And so those are the three big inflection points in American history. This is by far the biggest. And it's not just because, of the war on terrorism that really dominated the first few years of this century. It's also based on this collective sense of outrage over our economic system. It is this existential anxiety over climate change and what it's going to mean for us down the road and how we can combat it. And the piece that you quite astutely referenced is the changing social dynamic of what it means to be someone living in the United States along lines of race, gender identity, religious preference, persons with disabilities. Across the board, there is a power shift changing, as you said. And for so many people who are in I don't want to say a privileged class, but for so many people who hold certain privileges, they want to grasp onto certainty. They want to hold on to things that have always been, I guess, taken for granted. And one of those things is gender. Mm-hmm. One of those things is gender. It's the kind of thing where you didn't even have to think about it until quite recently. You'd be able to wake up and you'd say, oh, that person's a man and that person's a woman, that person's a boy, that person's a girl. And there it is. And I think a lot of people with privilege, and even some without privilege, have felt a frustration in realizing or being told that actually it's a lot more complicated than that. And not only that, but it always has been more complicated than that. You've just been given one part of the overall picture. And so part of the challenge of being transgender is explaining to people and trying to be patient and educate that these dynamics have always existed. You know, I've always been transgender. People who are trans non-binary have always been that way. The only decision that we make is whether or not to come out of the closet. That's it. We're seeing a lot more people come out of the closet now as trans non-binary and be proud of our, you know, values and who we are as people. And that's really putting people who are not trans non-binary in a more challenging space, which I think is good. It should reframe how they think of the world.
Charlotte, how do you think that your time in the military has informed how you think about your role in society today and the work that you've done professionally since that period of time?
Oh my goodness, that is a really good question, and I have a complex answer, and I'll try to boil it down. You know, the two big, I guess, philosophical influences that the military had on me were, one, that we are not a monolithic nation, right? We are a nation of so many different races and religions and ethnicities and you know, sexual backgrounds, gender identities across the board. We are, for lack of a better term, that melting pot that, you know, we were all often so told in elementary school. And in the military, you see things that both inspire you and kind of repulse you. You know, I did see racism in the military. I did see sexism in the military. I saw homophobia and transphobia. I saw Islamophobia. I saw anti-Semitism on occasion. But on the other hand, I saw things in the military that made me really proud of our country. You know, I saw people work together from different backgrounds. I saw a lot of people buy into this collective value system in which no one gets left behind and that we do fight for something larger than ourselves. And so I think leaving the military really gave me those two pillars of what it means for me to exist in this society. One being that identity does matter. Identity is central to who we are, and everyone has an identity, regardless of their background. And recognizing and respecting those identities is very important and critical to having a cohesive society. And the other one is selfless service. You know, I have always wanted to serve. I have always wanted to dedicate myself to a larger purpose. And I don't mean that to sound melodramatic or overly earnest, but it's true. I've always been that person ever since I was a kid. I wanted to serve in some capacity for a larger purpose. And the military emphasized to me that there are many ways to go about that. You don't have to serve in the military. There are, you know, nurses and doctors, and there are truck drivers who, you know, carry our food all across the country. There are, you know, people in grocery stores who quite literally kept our economy going just by going to work every day to work on a minimum wage, right? And so perhaps a big lesson from the military taught me that everyone deserves a living and happy existence, and that the government can play a central role in ensuring that no one gets left behind in that way.
You know, it's interesting to hear your reflections, because I think what's happened for many Americans during 2020 because of COVID is that we have a different level of appreciation for essential workers, right? Whereas in the past, there was just an assumption that everything happened and existed the way that it happened and existed just because it was, right? But I think that what the last 8 months has taught many of us is exactly to your point around, you know, the complex and diverse nature of how we think about identity, how we show up, the contributions we make as individual human beings. That's, you know, that spans race, class, gender, sexuality, difference, right? And, you know, wondering, you know, from your perspective, having the insight that you have, that you bring to the table, truly in this moment in time that is so divisive, even still to this day, what do you think it's going to take for us to heal as a nation, to really not just appreciate and clap for essential workers, but to really ensure and insist that there's equality and equity across the board?
I think our government taking a leading role is going to be the biggest thing here. And I'm a big believer that communities can support each other, and that people who live in the same space can come and work together. But we need a government that shows the example for doing that. We can't have this patchwork society where people who are living in Austin, Texas, are living differently, or living in a different system of inequity than those living in, say, Tampa Bay, Florida, or those living in New York City, or those in Sacramento. I mean, all across the country, people are in need of help. And you shouldn't have to move to one part of the country to ensure that your children are fed, that they're going to good schools, that everyone has access to health care that is affordable and doesn't leave anyone out in the cold, that people can afford things like insulin just to survive. These are all things that we can't leave to community-based solutions. It has to be the federal government leading with righteousness and with a sense of purpose to ensure that no one gets left behind.
Doesn't it also don't we also as a country have to come to terms with the myth of meritocracy and the American dream too? Because, what you're talking about requires us to dip into levels of humanity that we haven't seen in our most recent history, if ever at all, based upon the founding principles of this country. And so you and I had talked before the show about, this concept of trust. Right. And so it's interesting to think about, how trust factors into the ways in which over the last 4 years, there's been an eroding of trust at so many different levels, not just at the federal government, but how that's bled then down through, the ranks of how we think about civil society to then, really truly how we think about, what does it mean to be an American? Like, what is our responsibility as a collective and as individuals to be a part of something that's much larger than ourselves? And that really, from my perspective, takes this whole dismantling of how we think about meritocracy. Like, it's not, when we think about the American dream, you're right, everyone should have access and have a chance at that American dream. But the way in which we're born and socialized at a very early age largely dictates to some extent our chances in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you look at polling that's been done by Gallup and other institutions, over time, trust in American institutions has been slipping, whether it's Congress or the White House or the Supreme Court or the military. Even we've seen a certainly declining number of support for various institutions in the United States. And that's not by accident. That's because we are now more divisive. Everything is politicized, down to whether or not you wear a mask to protect yourself and others. That's now somehow a political statement for tens of millions of people in this country, which is tragic. I can't imagine how badly things would have gone if we had failed to come together after 9/11. Because it did lead to some horrific things, of course, the invasion of Iraq, and we can get to that whole conversation, but there was still that sense of unity in the year after 9/11. And that kind of unity that could be harnessed in a powerful way right now is completely missing. There are more than 250,000 Americans dead. 250,000. 250,000. That's, what is that? 2,700 times more than 270 times more than those who died. And I can't do the math real quick, but it's a lot more, many, many magnitudes more than those who died in 9/11. And it's tragic to me that we have seen the government collectively fail to bring the country together in this kind of horrific, catastrophic time period of ours.
Charlotte, you're so right. And it's interesting, the comparison to 9/11. What is different about 9/11 versus now, from your perspective, Charlotte?
Well, real quick, I did the math in my head just now. It's 83 times more. 83 times more deaths. Just thought I'd point that out real quick. But that does show you the magnitude of of how different things are now. 83 times more deaths now than in 9/11. But with 9/11, there was this immediate, instantaneous sense of community. I remember that. I remember everyone kind of putting our differences aside, rallying behind the president and Congress. And I was only 14 at the time, but that vividly stands out. Any partisanship got swept aside really quickly. And there were some horrific things that happened, especially hate crimes against Muslim Americans and then in the months after 9/11. But the country overall did have a sense of collective purpose. And I think it's because the enemy came from outside our country. And right now it seems like the threat is within the country. And whereas we could put the responsibility on our government and correctly put the responsibility on our government during 9/11 to respond to that threat, in such a larger sense, the responsibility is now on us as individuals. And that angers us, it terrifies us, and quite frankly, it puts us in a very uncomfortable position of having to be adults in a moment where being an adult seems to have less currency than it did years ago.
Charlotte, do you think the Trump administration tried to do exactly that, to make the enemy external by referring it consistently as the China virus?
Yes, I do. I thought it was horrifically racist and xenophobic. It was clear from the beginning that the Trump administration, and many Republican leaders, by the way, were attempting to frame this as an attack by China on the United States. And regardless of China's responsibility in holding accountable their response to the virus or whatever the hell went on there, the simple fact of the matter is that we had experts here on the ground in the U.S. who clearly warned the administration and specifically Trump that this was going to be an enormous threat and that he had a responsibility to respond to that by marshaling the resources of the federal government in making sure that Americans were protected. And not only did he fail to do that, but he tried to downplay it and then cover up the fact that he downplayed it. Why? I can't even begin to unpack the levels of impeachable actions that Trump took in that the first few months after the virus reached our shores. But it was a series of catastrophic and intentional errors that has led to the deaths of 250,000 Americans. And history will not judge him kindly for that.
We've had many diversity, equity, inclusion advocates and activists and people within the corporate sector on this particular show over the last 8 months. And often we talk about the fact that look like it's so much has come to the surface in 2020, the class and racial disparities in the healthcare system, the way in which this country still suffers from so many isms that many of us thought we had at least partially moved beyond, but here we are. And so often the conversation goes to, well, these things were always here. Yeah. 2020 may just have made more of you aware of what's happened and happening. But one of the things that the Trump administration has done is that it's flipped on its head how we think about being politically correct. Right. And so at least we know that it's all out there, right? It's all out there. The ugly is out there in the open to do something with now, right? If there's any sort of, bright moment in spite of all of this, is that we know truly, how many Americans feel. And so now we can finally do something with that, right? And yet I'm also torn with, kind of that logic in the sense of, well, it's always been there. And so now we know that it's there. And it's sometimes very discomforting to see, how ugly it is, right? And so as an American, for myself personally, having hosted, over 30 of these episodes now over the last 8 months, it's a bit disheartening to feel like I thought we were a better country than this. Yeah. And I can't help but think that there are millions and millions of other Americans that voted in record numbers, as we were talking about before the show, this year in hope that we could actually be better than this. Wanted to get your thoughts on that too, because I think that there's so much hope now, given the fact that, the Biden administration will come in January, but yet also so much pressure on his administration and to be able to like move change forward very quickly, right? And that, as we know, change takes time.
Yeah, well, I think one of the bigger lessons of the Trump era has been that those of us who are white have gotten a much needed education in what this country has always been. And because, you know, I'll be honest, as a white person, I feel like I can point to certain things and know that those are racist. But there is a systemic racist dynamic within the United States that has always existed that has not been so apparent to those of us who are white, myself certainly included. And I can only imagine how frustrating it's been for people of color in this country to hear those of us who are white, myself included, at early on in the administration say, you know, I don't recognize my own country. And it's got to be frustrating because for them, that's the country they've always recognized. It's not been in the kind of unabashed, racist manner in which we have become accustomed to with this White House, saying things that are so blatantly hateful and bigoted. And yet, for us, we were able to ignore it because it wasn't said in such harsh terms in the past. You brought up a good point, though, because here we see in this election that Joe Biden had an historic victory. Like he was the first presidential candidate to get more than 80 million votes. He, by a mile, won more votes. He and Kamala Harris won more votes for a presidential ticket than any other presidential ticket in history. He got a majority of the votes. He got a landslide in the Electoral College. So it was a clear victory for the White House. And yet, as you pointed out, more than 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. More than 70 million after the past 4 years, after seeing everything he's done. And so I don't dispute at all, not even a little bit, that is extremely troubling and it should concern us all. But I want to contextualize it for people a little bit. Campaigning during this pandemic has been unprecedented. It has been an unprecedented set of circumstances in which the Democratic Party has tried to engage responsibly by avoiding in-person campaigning, avoiding door knocking, avoiding human-to-human contact that would have put people at risk. The Republican Party had no such qualms. They went into communities, they talked to people directly, they probably put a lot of people at risk by doing so. And they were completely at peace doing that because they felt that it was a necessary means to an end. And so what we saw was that even with all of these clear things that Trump did that have been horrific during his term, Democrats were unable to message on these things because we weren't able to go into communities and also respect the guidelines of the CDC and other health experts who pointed out that campaigning would be extremely harmful to the people that we were trying to help. It's a catch-22. You're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Now, I think this is good news, though. I really do. I think that 2022 is going to see a rare moment of a president's party seeing an increase in seats in the House and the Senate during the 2022 midterms. I think Biden is going to lead us to victory. And it's going to be because Trump is not on the ballot, because by then we will have the vaccine for the virus in place. Much of the country will be vaccinated and be able to get back to life as usual. And I'm a lot more optimistic than a lot of people because of those circumstances. I really do believe that things are going to get a lot better, but it's going to get a lot worse for a second. And we need to be prepared for that.
You know, one of the things that I think we're just starting to have conversations about now, given the fact that so much had happened just in the last couple of weeks with the election, is the fact that for the first time we have a female and a woman of color as the incoming vice president of the United States. And that's very, very, very exciting. It's a very historic moment in time.
It's enormous. The fact that it's the first woman to serve at the highest levels of the executive, and that she's not only Black, she's not only South Asian, she's not only a daughter of immigrants, both her parents were immigrants to this country. It's not only all of that, it's that she is clearly by far qualified for the job, not only for vice president, but to serve as president and to lead our country. And that is an extremely exciting moment. I am quite thrilled about Kamala Harris as Madam Vice President. And I think that, if duty called upon her, if history called upon her, that she would serve with great honor and competence. And I think a sense of unity as president of the United States. And that's exactly what we kind of need in a vice president right now.
Agree. Totally agree. I'm so impressed by her charisma, by her presence, by the way in which she articulates herself, and just her intellectual acumen. It's going to be a tremendous next 4 years. And then, 8 years and then beyond.
That's right.
So I want to switch gears just a second here and talk about your time at Human Rights Campaign, HRC, and share with us a few of your biggest takeaway moments, your biggest aha moments during your tenure there as press secretary.
Right. So I worked at the Human Rights Campaign for 2 years. I led our rapid response efforts. So anytime something came out of the White House or the federal government pertaining to LGBTQ rights, I was usually the one who was leading our messaging in response to that. Anytime there was a tweet at 3 a.m., I would get a call and I would have to, be part of the team who responded to that. So you can imagine I didn't get a lot of sleep over my 2 years working there. But what I really took away is that the people at HRC, and not just HRC, but all of our coalition partners at GLSEN, at GLAAD, at the Center for American Progress, all of these organizations together, Land to Legal, I mean, there are way too many to name, but all of them together really work hard to ensure that folks in marginalized communities have champions fighting for them on a daily basis. And given how I would say aggressively this administration has gone after marginalized communities, the only thing that was standing between danger and people in marginalized communities were activists and the organizations that support advocacy. That starts with the ground activists, the folks who are doing the nitty-gritty groundwork at the local level. And it's buoyed, I think, by national organizations who are speaking to Congress, speaking to those in leadership, and ensuring that they have a good contextualization of what's going on. I'm really proud of my work there. And yes, most of the time it was playing defense. It was playing defense against a horrifically anti-LGBTQ White House. But it's setting the foundation for what's going to be a lot of offense in the coming years. A lot of going out of our way and being very intentional about protecting LGBTQ people, people of color, persons with disabilities, religious minorities, reproductive health care, just across the board, people not getting left behind by this government.
Charlotte, do you think that right now, because for so many of the reasons that we talked about at the beginning of the show around the complexity of identity and the moving away from binary constructs of either you're this or you're that, and allowing for much more fluidity in the sense of fluidity and intersectionality in the sense of how we think about who we are and how we show up. And I loved what you said at the beginning of our show, just around the different identities and different roles that you play, right? And how that blends to the richness of who you are and the value that you bring to the work that you do. And I'm wondering, do you think that organizations like HRC and all the other organizations that work in that the NGO space and work in human rights and social justice will also start to understand that there's much more power as a collective unity rather than, and I understand, I spent 10 years in the nonprofit world myself, and I understand, in large part there are often silos because sometimes these organizations are all competing with the same funds, right? And so they're all kind of competitors in a way. But in the same way now that companies are realizing, particularly in 2020 and beyond, you have to think of different ways to form partnerships and alliances in order to stay sustainable. Do you feel like nonprofit 501c3s will have to think about those partnerships in the same way and start to build bridges across some of those cause-based issues that in the past may have been a bit siloed and separated from each other?
Well, the good news is that they already are. That's the really good news, because you're absolutely right. These nonprofits really have to work together for collective movement goals. When I was working there, we didn't move or speak about reproductive rights until we had reached out to NARAL, Planned Parenthood, National Women's Law Center, other nonprofits. We didn't talk about racial equality until we reached out to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, until we had reached out to Color of Change, these other organizations that work on racial equality. We didn't speak specifically on trans rights until we had, grouped together with National Center for Trans Equality, Transgender Law Center to figure out what they were saying. And the reason we did that, it was to ensure that our messaging was consistent across the board, and that we were marshaling our resources together to confront attacks on vulnerable communities. So you're absolutely right. And the good news is that nonprofits are already doing that. And it's been specifically accelerated by the threat of this administration. I think Trump has really forced activists and organizations to come together and fight together against his heinous actions.
Let's talk about social media.
Okay.
So as we discussed at the beginning of the show, you and I met on Twitter many, many years ago now, or what seemed to be many years ago. You have over 500,000 followers on Twitter. And so
I think over 300,000, but I'm getting there.
You might have more than what you think, actually.
Oh, well, that's fair.
And so let's talk about the importance of social media and what that's meant for you in the sense of how you've built a following and how you use that to serve as everything as a role model, a mentor, but then also as a social justice activist and advocate for what you truly believe in.
Ooh, 12-hour conversation. It's funny. I have so many different views on this. Sometimes I'll be in DC and someone walks up because they recognize me from Twitter, and they'll say, "Oh, this is, it's so cool to meet you," and it's very flattering, and I'm of course flattered. And they'll say something, or they'll ask something along the lines of, "What is it like to be famous on Twitter?" And I say, and this is my honest answer, being a Twitter celebrity is like being famous for smoking. It's true. That's how it feels, because Twitter can be such a great tool for change and advocacy and community building. And it can also be extremely toxic and counterproductive and really tear communities apart when it's not done responsibly. And I think that describes social media in general. It describes really the internet in general. I am old enough where I remember the discourse in the mid-90s around the internet being the information superhighway, how it was going to connect the world, how it was going to lead to more peaceful solutions and cultural diffusion, right? And that's not what happened. It's not. I mean, in many ways, it did connect people in a positive way, but in many ways, it also accelerated those forces of hate that we have always fought against. White supremacists now use online spaces to organize and to press their propaganda. Trump, who I firmly believe is a proud white supremacist, has literally tweeted that African majority countries are quote unquote shithole countries. This is the president of the United States on Twitter saying that, and it reaches tens of millions of people instantly when he does that. So I think it's a mixed bag. And what I would really love to see over the next, I would say, decade or so, is for all of us as a society to really get to a place where we're using social media in a more responsible manner, in which we are, I think, taking out the divisiveness that has really characterized it, especially over the past few years. Again, this could be a 12-hour conversation, but I think it's been good. Like, the Me Too movement was launched through Twitter. In fact, I was on the ground level. I'm the one who sent Alyssa Milano the screenshot that she used for her tweet. And that is what catalyzed Tarana Burke's life work and made her big Me Too project, the national talking point. The Arab Spring came out of Twitter. Black Lives Matter, which I firmly believe is the most important civil rights movement in the modern era, came out of Twitter. So there are a number of great things that happen through Twitter, but the bad things are really bad. Like, they're really bad. And we need to be honest about that and ask ourselves what can be done, and specifically what can be done through the federal government to ensure that platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram are held accountable and respond and engage with the public ethically.
There's also the removing of the Wild West mentality of social media too, right? Because I think that it's in so many circles, no matter if we're sharing recipes or pictures of our cats or, posting something that we believe in politically or from a humanitarian perspective. There's a way in which I think that we as individuals also have responsibilities to ensure that we're acting in a humane way, right? In the same way that we have these conversations now with the pandemic around, like, how can we show more empathy? How can we be more understanding? How can we be more patient? How can we, start to think outside the box in the sense of how we think about our relationships with others? There's yet that sort of mindset hasn't always transferred over to how we think about social media. And I really think, much to the point of what you've been saying around leadership starts at the top, it starts with the federal government, it starts with the president. I think that there's a way in which look like it's, no matter to what extent you supported Biden in, the primaries and of course during the general election, but there is a sense of compassion and humanity that I think he just embodies and who he is as an individual human being, right? And you can see that. You saw that during the debate where, you would ask people, did I answer your question completely, right? Did I answer you in the way that you wanted to be answered, right? And there's a way in which you sense that that he truly is a human being that really does want to make a difference in this country, right? And then he's doing it for the right reasons. And I do hope that that message emanates from the top. But I also think that there's also a bottom-up approach in the sense of, how what is the level of responsibility that tech companies themselves have for ensuring that, they're also living up to their civic responsibility and corporate social responsibilities as they are as companies as well, to ensure that they're providing safe spaces for their customers and for their clients. And I think that there's a perspective that when you're on a social media platform and you're not paying a subscription for it, right? Because for most of us, we don't pay for LinkedIn, we don't pay for Facebook, we don't pay for Twitter, that there's this freedom that accompanies that too, right? And so we don't necessarily see ourselves as consumers consuming the product because it's all just for free. Do you know what I mean? And so there's kind of this weird sort of like, how do you behave as a responsible consumer in a larger audience where you're communicating and consuming content from others? It's complicated.
Excuse me. It's very complicated. I will be honest. I used to be in the bad habit of retweeting articles before I read them because, either it came from a source that I respected or it was tweeted by someone I respected. And so I knew that whatever they were tweeting out was being done in good faith. I don't do that anymore. I will click on the link. I will actually read the article. I will make sure that it aligns with my thinking or that it makes sense or that it's being truthful. And then I will amplify it. And that's just a micro example of kind of our responsibility as individuals to ensure that we're promoting, I would say, fights against disinformation and falsehoods that have so dominated our political discourse.
Absolutely. So this is one of my favorite questions I'm going to ask you of the day. So you've been acknowledged and the recipient of many awards across your career, and you were recently named to Forbes Top 40 Under 40, as you have been to other Top 40 Under 40 lists as well. What do honors like that mean to you? How does that make you feel when you receive to be nominated as one of Forbes Top 40 Under 40? That's really very cool.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not going to lie. It's amazing. It feels great. It feels great. But, I do want to put this into context. There are tens of thousands. No, really. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of people who are my age or a little older, a little younger, who are under 40, who are just as deserving. And because their work isn't visible or seen by as many people, they don't get as much recognition. And so, yes, I am proud of my work. And I do think it's cool to be honored for it. But I also recognize that, I could easily be replaced by any number of hundreds of thousands of people who do the kind of work that needs to be done in their communities or at the state level, or who really help people that aren't necessarily getting the kind of visibility they deserve. One thing that I think is important that I've seen in my generation is that we do have a stronger sense of that. I'm not saying previous generations don't necessarily, but I do think that we're people my age are more likely, I believe, when a panel reaches out to us, or an organizer reaches out to us to ask us if we want to be in a panel, we're more likely to ask questions like, is it an all-white panel? Is it an all-male panel? Is it an all, non-LGBTQ panel? Are there persons with disabilities that were invited? We ask these kind of questions because we want to ensure that any kind of topic that is worth speaking about has people at the table who don't all look like each other and think like each other. And that is something that I am proud to say characterizes a lot of folks my age and younger. And quite frankly, we've gotten there because of the work of people much older than us who really instilled in us those values of inclusion. And so really it's a cross-generational effort, and it's exactly the direction that we all want to be going.
Charlotte, are you ready for the lightning round?
Let's do it.
What advice would you have for your 85-year-old self today?
Oh, God. Well, first of all, congratulations. Well done, you. Well done. Listen, there is nothing more in my life that I want to be than an old woman. I think that would be magnificent. You can say whatever the hell you want, do whatever the hell you want, within reason. Don't be hateful. But you can be grumpy and just, sit around all day watching TV. And no, I'm kidding. But I do admire older women more than anyone. I really do, because they've seen some shit. They really have, across the board, especially women of color, especially older trans women who I look up to as role models, who came out of the closet back when no one knew what the word transgender meant. So if I make it to 85, I'm going to count my blessings, but I will give it my advice to 85-year-old Charlotte. Enjoy yourself. You made it this far. You deserve some time off. Enjoy yourself.
I love that. What are your favorite comfort foods during COVID?
Oh, gosh. Well, I have the worst diet of anyone I know. I should point that out. It's terrible. Like, it was that way before COVID, by the way. I'll go through these spells where I'm like, okay, I'm going to eat more salad or eat more vegetables or drink more water. And I do for a little bit, and then I revert back to this junk food. My comfort foods have been pasta, because I love pasta. I know that people said they were going to get sick of pasta during COVID. I have not gotten sick of it. I love pasta. And I would say wine. I mean, wine has been wonderful throughout the entire COVID experience. I love just sitting back with a glass of wine every couple nights and just enjoying myself.
So perfect segue to the next question. What are you binge watching right now?
Ooh, okay. Well, I just finished the 4th season of The Crown.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew, because I social stalk you still to this day on social media, so I knew that was going to come up, and I haven't seen it, so don't tell me. But I know what happens, but don't tell me.
I will tell you this. It is my favorite season thus far. And I'm sure that there are some people who disagree with me. I know there was a lot of controversy over the 3rd season because it was a little darker and more nuanced. I thought this season hit it way out of the ballpark. It was so damn good. You were going to love it. What else have I been binge watching? Oh, God. So I'm going to be trashy for a second because I think it's good for all of us to meet in a space where there's no shame for these moments. I think people who do super serious work need to sit back and do super unserious activities. There needs to be balance. There needs to be that drawing out of the venom, so to speak. I've been watching the latest season of Survivor. I haven't seen Survivor since the first season in 99, 2000. Remember that with Richard Hatch and the first one that was like the biggest thing on television. And I was a kid and I watched it. I haven't seen it since, but a couple days ago it was on Netflix and I was like, I guess I'm doing this. And so I started watching and I got so caught up in it. It's such delicious trash TV. I love it. It's beautiful.
I love that. I have friends that watch The Bachelor and The Bachelorette for the same reasons. I have friends that watch the Great Britain cooking show.
British Bake Off.
Yes, that.
I think that's it. Yeah,
I think that's it too. I don't know. They bake. That's what I know.
It's baked cakes. They bake cakes, and they look amazing.
It's a lot of cakes. It's a lot of cakes.
A lot of cakes. Goodness gracious. What about you? What have you been watching?
Oh my gosh. So similar to the sort of like not mindless because I think it's a cute show, but recently watched Schitt's Creek, which was hilarious. The fashion on that show is amazing. Oh my gosh. Like to be a costume designer on that show would be incredible. The Crown is next on the list. And then what else? I would love to repeat, but I feel like this would be the third time I've watched the entire series of Mad Men because I love Mad Men. Mm-hmm.
I did too.
Yeah. What else? I feel like we just finished a series. And do you also feel like where have the last 8 months gone? Because, it's here we are. It's, we're premiering the show on Tuesday, 2 days before Thanksgiving of 2020. It's crazy to think about, what we've learned and how we've grown during this time period.
And, not to look, it's been incredibly stressful. There have been days when I cried because the stress was too much, especially with the election. And with the protests this summer that were so very much needed to fight back against white supremacy and police violence. But there have been moments when you just need to kick back and enjoy things and really enjoy life. And I have watched every single show under the sun. I watched all of the Wonder Years in July. I saw it on Hulu. I had seen only a couple episodes and I went through the entire goddamn series in like a week. It was disgusting. It was a disgusting amount of TV watching, I would say. It was great. Emily in Paris also. There are some people who rightly despise that show. They hate it. I love it. I think it's amazing. I don't need a documentary about Paris. That's not why I'm watching. I'm watching for distraction and escape. And let me tell you, Emily in Paris gives it to me.
That's a good one. Charlotte, what's next for you? How do you think about the next period of your career?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm writing a book proposal right now. And so hopefully in the next couple months, we will be announcing a book deal, which would be wonderful. And then in the meantime, I'm trying to just be useful where I can be. There are, I don't make money from Twitter, by the way. I don't have a Patreon. I don't have a GoFundMe or whatever the hell. All the work that I do is really done for free. And there's a reason for that because, I'm able to get odd jobs here and I can write occasional articles to pay my bills. But there are a lot of people who need money. And so I would say if you are looking for ways to put your money to good use, donate to local activist organizations, find a local LGBTQ center that needs some money for housing and for food and make sure you put your money toward there. But as for me, I'm just trying to be useful where I can be.
Charlotte, thank you so much. And when you get that book deal, you have to come back. Come back before then because we have a lot of other things we didn't even get to today. So we'd love to invite you back for the next conversation, part 2.
Love it. Dan, you're amazing. And your hair is amazing today. My goodness.
Thank you. Your hair is amazing.
I know.
See, the next show we have to talk about shoes. We didn't even get to the shoe part of the show today.
Yes.
The next time, shoes.
And we'll talk about Louis Vuitton and their lack of equity in sizes, but that's another conversation. So.
Yes, I love that theme for the next time. Thanks everyone for staying with us today. I'm Jan Marshall-Doms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. Please make sure to like our video and comment in the chat box. And make sure to visit us at joinmayshad.com. We can't wait to have you as a member in our efforts to together revolutionize how professional women connect, engage, and do business together. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Hi, everyone. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to hit the bell to receive notifications of all of our upcoming content. Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Have a great day.